Hello and welcome back to the channel. It is so good to have you here. Get ready to relax, sit back, grab a coffee, relax in bed, relax on the couch, and let's take a look at some people's extremely unnerving experiences where they went through some outright disturbing things that they will never forget until the very end of their days. Please subscribe to the channel if this is your first time here. Click the notification bell next to the subscribe button, and please leave a like to support the channel. Thank you. We're going to be getting into the first case. I'll see you guys in a second. I don't know much about Connecticut. I really do think that it looks like a beautiful place in my opinion, and maybe some of you actually live there. Our first horrifying experience that we are going to be covering today is coming out of Connecticut, and it is more specifically revolving around an abandoned castle called the Hearthstone Castle. This is a castle that apparently has been abandoned since the 1980s, and it is one of the hottest topics for explorers all around the world. It's massive, it's gracious, and it is insanely cool if you've ever been there. But today, I'm going to be discussing something that happened to one of my subscribers who is a medic, more specifically a paramedic who works as a first responder. We're going to be calling her Jenna, and Jenna was working as a first responder in 2007 when she had this encounter. They received a call, they attended, and something happened which wasn't supposed to happen. And it was so out of the ordinary compared to the normal calls she had received while working that they couldn't really make much sense of it, to the point where they had to call the cops and have the cops quote unquote sweep the building for what was going on. First, let's go all the way back. Jenna was always wanting to become a medic since she was extremely young. Just like when a lot of us have the idea of becoming a police officer, a soldier, an artist, a dancer, a singer, whatever it may be, that we have that passion and dream, but most of us never reach that point where we even bother pursuing it in the first place, let alone actually becoming that dream. Jenna's dream was more realistic. She knew what she had to do to get there, and granted it was difficult and very expensive, she managed to do it. Becoming a medic was something she always dreamed of, and it led her into some pretty heroic actions, saving lives, stopping people from getting into danger, and just being in overall situations where you're there to help people who are in desperate need and emergency. You could call these people the real life angels, and I myself personally do. The reason I do is because they're the first people we call when something goes really wrong with our health. They are there as quickly as they can be, and in recent times obviously they are being stretched and their resources are very, very thin right now, depending on which country you're in. But in 2006 and even 2007, probably up until 2012, there was a lot more of ability to attend calls faster from what I can see. And being a first responder back then was a lot more about community. This was before the age of technology really kind of just boomed and went crazy. It was before the age where people were alienated and didn't even know their own neighbors. So you could obviously tell who your local officers were. Some people could even name them. And if we go as far back as the 1980s, people knew who the officer was, the sheriff for their town and their county. You don't really get that anymore. It's not really something people seem to care about or even know, which in my opinion is sad. Jenna was somebody who was a medic for the community. She did it to save people, and at the time the salary was good. She was paid well and the economy was still livable, even on good average wages, and she was trying her hardest to just do everything she could to, finish each shift exhausted, knowing that she had saved people, helped people, and aided people to hospital. We're going to be starting right at the beginning of her career. Her training was extremely stressful, difficult, and complex. Becoming a medic, especially a paramedic, is not easy. You have to have a lot of skills. You have to go through a lot of different courses and testing. And, rightly so, you have people's lives in your hands. Jenna was always somebody who knew that if she got an unusual call, she was always there, no matter what. If it was a call about someone in danger, in a situation that was still dangerous, she would prepare herself to have a colleague and just go in anyway. Now, they teach the medics that their own safety is more important first than the actual patients. And this is because if they don't do that, then they'll end up being a patient themselves if they go into a dangerous situation. They first make sure that they are safe, and then they can give some kind of attention to the person in need. This is what makes this encounter so bizarre, and it tested Jenna's training and knowledge and experience to the absolute max. In 2007, Jenna was in her 20s, and she was somebody who was still rather inexperienced when it came to attending complex calls like the one at Hearthstone. Now, the really weird thing about this is that a lot of medics get very worried about attending these types of calls. And me, myself, would have just thought, oh, they're heroes, right? So they don't have fear. That's not true. Jenna was driving along, and when she got her first call come in on the, the systems they have, like the touchscreen. It wasn't touchscreen back then, I don't think. But it's like the radios, and you just get radioed in. They say what's happening. You put on the lights, you put on a siren, depending on the severity of the emergency, and you go for it. You get to the address. Now, Jenna was actually on patrol with a fellow colleague who we're going to be calling Adam. And when Jenna and Adam were together, you were pretty much guaranteed that your life would be saved. These two were the most inseparable medics in the area, and both of them were really, really good at what they did. Jenna loved being with him, and Adam loved being with her. They were a great team. So when they get this call come through from dispatch, they are a bit confused because she's had calls in the past at sports facilities, stadiums, even national parks. People have been hiking and unfortunately had strokes or accidents on their bikes and driving out to the park. So she's gone through a lot of different calls. But this was by far the most bizarre because when she heard the dispatch explaining what it was, she heard the words Hearthstone Castle. And she just thought, she knew the castle because it's quite famous, but she didn't really she'd never been there because obviously it's been abandoned for decades. And she just thought instantly, this isn't good. She was worried. She was worried. She admitted that to me. But she had a sense of true fear because there are people out there that not only do prank calls on first responders, which I really despise, but there are also people out there that are outright evil and could be putting people in traps that are dangerous. So Jenna and Adam had a situation where they had to analyze whether they required assistance from a law enforcement officer, because if they were going to be in danger, obviously they're not armed, they're not trained in, I don't think they are trained in any kind of physical, defense as medics. They might be, maybe now they are, but in 2007 and 2006, I don't think they were. So she was driving her car. It's not raining at all, and it's evening time. So at this point, she looks to Adam and she's just like, we have to take this call, right? And he's like, yes, we're going to take this call. So they drive out to the location. It's dark. They don't know really any information other than someone is calling and they are asking for help, saying that they are hurt. So Jenna thought exactly what I thought in this situation, if I were to hear this, is that it's just people who are explorers. You know, there are people on YouTube that make the exploration videos where they go around basically just filming cool abandoned buildings, and they always end up hurting themselves by tripping on stuff or breathing in some really bad like mold or asbestos because the buildings are so old. And yeah, they're always getting themselves in a lot of trouble, whether it be, health-wise or, guard dogs and things going down. It's not really a safe thing to do, but a lot of people are attracted to that kind of thrill that it gives them. So Jenna and Adam didn't really have any idea of what they were attending. People were asking for help and they were in an emergency. Dispatch was continually trying to probe and ask questions about what was actually wrong. And the person on the other side of the line was not answering these questions. They were just crying out in pain. That's never a good sign because it basically means the person is kind of unresponsive in the sense that they're not answering the questions because they might be in so much pain that they're losing consciousness. There's many reasons. There's so many different reasons. Jenna went through a long list of them as to, what she thought it could have been. And it's literally like thousands of different things. They could have banged their head. They could have had concussion. They could have had a medical, they could have had a stroke. They could have, there's so many different things. They could have a condition where they don't have their, certain type of substance they have to take or medication where they have now been exploring and they've fallen down and now they're in trouble. There's a lot of things that it could have been. And it's that unsure. It's that unsurety. It's the unknown that scared Jenna and Adam. So they pull up to this huge castle, absolutely beautiful, but it's in really bad condition. It's not really been properly renovated or taken care of. Like I said, since the 1980s roughly, it has been in disrepair. People have been going in it. People have been graffitiing, ransacking, filming exploration videos, and it's dangerous for both medics to go in there on their own. It's kind of dangerous because I thought this was going to be a trap, and when she was explaining this, I was like, what's she going to say? Something very, very bad has happened to her when she goes inside this castle with Adam. Now, it was good she had Adam with her because that was better than her going in alone. And she said that she would not have been able to go in alone. It would have broken the training or the protocols of how she is supposed to be a first responder, and she would get in trouble with her supervisor. So they both decide to put local law enforcement on standby. The dispatch caller, who they'd been talking to the whole way while driving to the castle, had agreed that they would put a unit on standby. So they had a local unit, one officer in a vehicle around 1.5 miles away. If he was needed, he would attend the Hearthstone Castle. But when Jenna and Adam got there, the first thing they realized is that there were no lights on anywhere. Now, with explorers, trust me, they always take lights. They will take flashlights, lanterns, phone flashlights, lighters, torches, any source of light you can imagine, they will take it. No one is doing these explorations in the total darkness. And Hearthstone Castle does have windows, but from what I could see, they were very small. And obviously, because it's dark, it was cloudy, so there was no moonlight or full moon to light up the room. So basically, unless it was one of the back side of the castle rooms, Jenna was seeing, as she stood there at the foot of the castle, that this was a call to someone that didn't have a light. So they now had to use simple call-outs to get the whereabouts. So a call-out is what the medics will do if they don't know where someone is. And it's, say, in a big building, in a forest, hidden somewhere, stuck, trapped. They do this a lot with the skiers who get stuck underneath trees and stuff when there is heavy snow, or they get an avalanche or a mini avalanche that causes skiers to become trapped in between compact snow. Calling out and call outs are when you just try to get the attention of the person and get them to make contact with you by calling or making a noise, banging things. It's the only way really that it will work, other than the last resort, which is very time consuming, which requires them to walk around with all their equipment, the whole area. So that would take them like a whole day, depending on how big the area is. Hearthstone Castle wasn't safe. It was abandoned. There could have been lots of things in there. There could have been other people. So they were going to use this method to try and figure out where the person in need was. At this point, the dispatch was relaying information that the call had hung up. It had lost connection. That was another bad thing to Jenna, as she had no idea what to expect at this point. The person could have intentionally hung up, seeing that she had arrived in her vehicle, or they could have just, again, lost consciousness, dropped the phone, or the signal did just disconnect. Those castles have very thick walls, so they probably don't have very much signal going in and out of them. So Jenna first, her and Adam grab their flashlights. That's priority here. They need vision. They need eyes, as they say. The military saying, eyes, give me eyes. So they're using their flashlights on the outside of the castle at this point. Lots of the windows had been smashed in, and they were really in a state. So they start shining their flashlights through those windows, those gaps, and they start calling out. They're shouting out, "Paramedic, can you make us known of your presence? We're here to help you. Where are you?" And there are no responses. So Jenna, at this point, gets suspicions that people are having them on. It's a prank. They have left. Basically, they've made flight and just abandoned the castle. So she has to analyze in this situation if it's worth staying and trying to find if there is someone there, or if they need to leave, because obviously the whole of Connecticut is big. They have to go and help other people in need of their assistance. So they can't just go around a whole castle for hours and hours searching for someone when it could have been a false call. And that's one thing I've always found, guys, quickly. In my opinion, a lot of USA and states don't take prank calls serious enough with their law enforcement and their dispatch. Here in the UK, it's very serious, extremely, to the point where they will find you, try and locate the call, and actually arrest you for, falsely calling and claiming emergencies when there aren't, because you're wasting resources that are already stretched so thin. So Jenna's there. She's very, very confused. She's stressed. She's scared. But she has to make a professional decision based on what she's seeing. She has to analyze. At this point, Adam recommends that they give the all clear to the law enforcement officer who was 1.5 miles away. And she agrees. They contact dispatch again and they ask for assistance from this one officer. And the officer turns up. And this guy is very confident. He's been to the castle before. He's had issues with people trespassing on it, people squatting in it and living homelessly, and obviously the good old explorers, which most of the time tend to be harmless. They're just there to film videos or get photos for their website or whatever, and then they'll just leave. The problem with them is whether they fall or hurt themselves traveling through the rooms and stuff. So the officer, Adam, Jenna, they've all got their flashlights. The officer has a weapon. He is fully trained and he knows how to handle these situations. So they prepare to make their way in. Now, there is an entrance, but it was very, very heavily barricaded, as if someone was squatting there in the past and had tried to board up the one entrance in. They now had to figure out how they were going to get into this castle safely and effectively. For example, if the frame is like glass and it's shattered, they can't just climb in because they're going to cut all their thighs and the frame will still have shards of glass sticking out. So this already turned into 10-15 minutes of wasted time that just had to be wasted to get in safely. First, the officer goes in. He starts scanning the lower level rooms. They're continually calling out at this point and trying to figure out who's there, are they there, is it a joke? Remember, this is now wasting Jenna, Adam, and a law enforcement officer's time. So that's 3 first responders who are busy dealing with something that they have a suspicion could be false and a waste of their time. This is serious. Because on the other side of Connecticut, there could be something going on where those 3 are needed desperately. But they still have belief. If someone's truly hurt, if someone has lost consciousness, they have a duty. They swore the oath. And they must stand up and try their hardest to locate someone. So they make the decision. The officer goes forth and sweeps the floors. If you don't know what it means, it's again another kind of military term where you sweep the floors. In other words, you look everywhere, in every room. You sweep the floors with your eyes. Up, down, go to the next room, up, down, all the floors. Because this person's body could be in the corner, could be behind furniture or obstructions and objects. So it becomes a game of like, where's Wally? You know, that little book that people used to buy where you find the character in amongst all the other characters. It's very difficult. And depending on the actual location and the terrain and the rooms, it can become near impossible. Sometimes they have to employ sniffer dogs to the situation or use some kind of technology to locate the human and the heat source where they're coming from. So Jenna is there. She's on the back foot. This officer knows what he's doing. Now, Jenna and Adam have a lot of equipment, and I mentioned this in a previous video where I did a paramedic encounter from another subscriber, and they have to carry very heavy equipment when attending remote calls because they need to take a lot of stuff to resuscitate, to help people, to deal with lots of different injuries or ailments. Anything could be, happening, what they're about to see. So the officer is sweeping all the floors. No one's replied at this point. Took him 10 minutes to get in. Another 10 minutes sweeping the first 6 or 7 rooms on the first floor. Now, Jenna said this place was massive, but it was mostly gutted. It was just big stone walls. There was a bit of lots of trash everywhere. There were needles and different things like that. But it was no sign of life, no sign of humans or people or even animals. As they're on their way to make it upstairs, they start hearing a faint knocking sound. Now, this is telltale for someone in need, and Jenna immediately knew this. Her training started to kick in, and she realized this could be someone who is partially conscious or unable to speak, scream, or make a noise, knocking and banging things. This is a great technique that I would advise if you can't get someone's attention and you need their help. And this is what you do. You knock stuff, you do anything you can to make noise. And Jenna, the officer, and Adam freeze. They immediately stand still and listen. And they hear this knocking. She said it sounded like someone was laying down. They had shoes on and they were kicking against a wardrobe. And it was echoing faintly. It wasn't very loud, but it was bouncing off the stone walls of this castle. So again, the officer calls out his law enforcement department, who he is, his badge number, and he says, "If you're here, can you make yourself known?" And there's a pause. It's a few seconds. And they're about to take the first step. Okay, if you've been to Hearthstone Castle, you'll know roughly the layout, but it has changed. I don't know if it's still abandoned, but they were going to take their first steps, and they hear, "Help." The most cliche thing that you would ever hear in this situation. They hear a faint help. And Jenna said that it sounded very young. It sounded, she didn't have a son at this point, but she had a son when she was 34, and it sounded like him. So she was worried. This was a very, it's not good, because when people like that are involved, it becomes more serious, becomes more of an issue. So they go up. They go sweeping like crazy, calling out, "The help, stop." It was just one help. That's it. And it was faint. The knocking stopped, and it was driving them insane, to the point where the officer said, "I need to radio, backup." So he radios back up. And his supervisor turns up, a sergeant. And at this point, they are like, "What is going on? This is really not good. Somebody is in this castle." We have now confirmed, as we have heard somebody call out from above, and we know they are in desperate need. They are clearly in and out of consciousness, and they have called out for help one time and one time only. The officer updates his sergeant. He explains carefully what they've done so far, which rooms he has swept and which rooms he hasn't. They both now, in a team formation, go faster. They're sweeping more floors. This level, there's nothing. It's all the same stuff. Needles, chips packets, cans of energy drinks, all the usual stuff of youth hanging out in groups in this cool place, as you would expect with abandoned buildings. So they sweep, and there is nothing. They get to the very last room, and there is nothing, but it doesn't end there. Now, Jenna and Adam are exhausted at this point. They've been carrying heavy equipment up and down, round and around. They've been walking for around half an hour to 40 minutes with this heavy equipment, and it's not typical walking. It's the type of walking where you have to look where you're walking. A plank could give way. Obstructions, litter, needles, things in the way. It's not relaxing, 40-minute walk with slightly heavy equipment down a clear road. It's not the same. It's physically demanding, it's mentally draining, because the focus has to be so intense. It's not easy. She was exhausted, Adam was exhausted, and the officers were completely lost for words. They turned around and looked at Jenna and Adam, and they looked lost, because The other officer, not the sergeant, was certain, and so was Jenna and Adam, that they had heard that voice. But they had searched everywhere. They had even moved some like big box that was in there that someone had used to like sleep inside, and it had an old cover, like an old blanket, a thick winter blanket, like a grey blanket. They moved that across, and there was just all this mold and dust flying off it. There was no one anywhere. And they called and called and called, and they said, the sergeant was like, no, we can't deal with this. We need to get the K9. So they get the K9, the one that locates things, not the one that, catches people. And they sniff around. This dog is going crazy, just sniffing like crazy, as if someone is definitely there. The whole time, the dog is going crazy, as if it is about to find a scent. And if you've ever trained with canines or sniffer dogs, you'll know they behave certain ways. They give certain responses to signals, smells. They'll sit or act a different way if they smell or locate something or detect something. And Jenna said that this handler, the dog handler, was really confused because his dog was giving semi-signals. It didn't make sense. The dog was like about to sit down in an area, then he'd move on, then he'd go to the next room and he'd sniff, and he'd be about to sit down again, and he wouldn't. And Jenna explained this, which made me believe this was some kind of paranormal case, and I think you guys are going to agree, is that when they got to a certain point of just thinking, well, the dog doesn't know what it's doing, or something's wrong, there's confusing scents around here, maybe other dogs or animals or foxes have been here, is when she explained that it was like the dog was just following a scent constantly on the move. And when I heard her say that, it clicked. This was a case that they have never dealt with before, a case that they have really never experienced anything like ever again. And she continued to be a medic for decades after this, She retired in 2024, and she had a good career. But when she went through this, she was so confused at what it was that called out help, that they got everyone there. At one point, she felt like the whole of, the area was there, but obviously it wasn't. It was like 4 or 5 different vehicles, first responders, and they couldn't find the voice. And the superiors of all the different departments turn up, and they're just there like, well, you're clearly just hearing stuff. It's the wind. None of them would accept that it could have been something paranormal or spirit related. But the weird thing is that someone made the call. That's the bit that doesn't make sense, because I can understand the voice. I can understand the calling and the dog as well, because dogs can sense different things in paranormal activity. But the problem is I can't get the call. It just seems weird. It's like my friend tried telling me it's a spirit that wants to be freed from the castle, so it got the contact, it got the attention of the responders, but it doesn't add up. And I'm very interested to see what you guys have to say. Of course, Jenna was looking for me for closure, for clarity, for understanding. And I couldn't give it to her. I said it does sound paranormal. It sounds like a spirit was trapped. But they wanted you to help with something. But it's funny, because with this paranormal kind of stuff, in my opinion, it all happens when you don't expect it and when you don't want it to happen. And then when you stand there, call out, or these people that do all this paranormal tracking, and they go to the buildings with all the devices, and you stand there, and most of the time nothing happens when you're trying to get the reaction. It's very, very bizarre. I have my own personal encounters I'll be covering. One I'm going to be covering in tomorrow's video, so yeah, I know you guys will like that. But this one, Jenna's experience as a medic attending the Hearthstone Castle, this, in my opinion, is paranormal, and it's extremely cool, but also disturbing. Do you really know who you live around? In today's day and age, it's so common to not actually know who your neighbours are, or to even speak to them at all. This is really sad, because I sometimes look at this and wish that I was back in the 80s, in the 70s, 60s, and even further back. When there was community, people knew who their neighbours were. Today's encounter that I'm going to be discussing comes from a lady who lived through that era. It's actually one of the elderly submissions that I have, and I don't get many submissions from people over the age of 70. I know a lot of people do watch my channel who are that age and older, but they tend to not know how to submit things. And although this lady actually went through this experience a couple of years ago now and sent it to me a couple of years ago, as she's been a subscriber for years, I wanted to make it clear that she is one of the only ones that I have from somebody who is over 70 and has that perspective of knowing how times have changed, possibly become more dangerous, and just feel different. Now, we're going to call this lady Shiela. She lives in Minneapolis. She lives not in the rundown area, but in a very nice area in Minneapolis. Technically, it's outside of Minneapolis, but we'll just say Minneapolis for reference. This was a really, really hard-hitting one for me because she has lived in this neighborhood for the best part of 50 years. The house she lives in, and I hope she's okay because I haven't heard from her in a few years, but she is in a situation where she knew everyone on the street until eventually people would move, people would pass away, people would sell up, families would leave, flock the nest, the sons and daughters would go off and get a career or a job, or they'd travel, or they'd just go and live their life doing whatever. And Shiela, when she reached her old age, she became retired. She used to work in public services. She just basically sat there and spent a lot of time with her friends and family, as lots of people want to do when they are retiring. She had a lot more time to pay attention to the neighborhood. She had a lot more time to just study what was going on in the street. And this is kind of a taboo thing when it comes to the UK and America. But when you go to places like Italy or Spain, especially the rural areas and the towns, these places actually still, to this day, have the elders that hang out the windows and look. Now, they don't quite literally hang out the windows. They lean out them. Sometimes they smoke something, but they tend to just watch. This was really common back way before the 80s and 70s and so on. And it was just, basically people watching, but it was also a form of enforcement. The one person that you would seemingly not fear at all was actually the most scary, the most enforcing. And these elders were the ones that had connections to everyone's family, knew the local community, and had a way of judging people in a safe and honest way. And you wouldn't step out of line. It was something that Shiela misses, and that kind of community, her friends, some had passed on at this point. And she never thought that in all the years of people watching, in her elder years, that she would come across the most bizarre thing that she's ever seen. The specific situation involves a house at the end of her street. Now, remember that I told you guys that the street that she lives on is not run down. And this is usually the only kind of thing that you get at run down neighborhoods. Places where the houses aren't renovated. People pass away and they can't find the inheritor. It's things like this that you would expect to happen in certain neighborhoods. But Shiela spent more and more time getting to know people in her neighborhood as new people moved in, and her friends and close relatives and neighbors would either leave, pass away, or travel off, and they didn't want to know her. And it broke my heart when she was explaining this, because as she was lonely, she didn't have a husband. She never had a husband, but unfortunately, she had a situation which she explained. She doesn't want me to go into too much detail, but she did have a family. But her husband, her boyfriend, she didn't want me to call him that, was a guy that didn't want to get married. And he ended up just basically running off. So that broke her heart. And when that happened way back in the 90s or the 80s, she just said, I'm not going to, I don't want any more relationships. So she focused on raising her kids and taking care of the house, working a full-time job in public services in the city. So she had a lot less time back then. But she still enjoyed keeping in touch with friends, keeping in touch with family. This house at the end of her street, which is the highlight of today's encounter, is something so bizarre. Now, Shiela does not have any form of Alzheimer's, dementia, no symptoms leading up to it, and has perfect memory. She has her physical done once a year with the local family doctor, or whatever they call them in the US. I think that's what you call them, but it's what we call them in the UK. And she is always passing with flying colors. She has a healthy weight. She does a lot of exercise. She sometimes plays golf. She goes on hikes. She does a little bit of swimming when she finds the time at the local swimming bars and leisure centers and gyms. So she is a relatively healthy and, in shape lady, especially for her age. I wouldn't even say relatively. She's very healthy. So I had to just say that to get it out of the way, because there'll be people commenting down below saying, hang on, well, what if she's just making this up in her head? This house at the end of the road was pretty much derelict for a best part of 3 months, and you bet Shiela knew about it because she was people watching. Now, even a couple of years ago, Shiela was not the type of lady who would simply just sit on an iPad. Even though she had access to the best tech, the best TV shows, all the series or whatever, she said none of it really entertained her. She found it all overstimulating. She found it all in your face, commercials, and it was all very stressful. She prefers the era of television back in the 90s and the 80s, when it was basic, when it was simple colors, wholesome, orange, kind of, relaxing feeling, like the streetlights when they were orange. She doesn't like all the big plasma screens and that kind of cinema vibe where you've got the LEDs and it's like 10 trillion frame rates a second. What am I looking at here? So she just began detaching from all that stuff. She didn't watch her favorite show anymore. She stopped watching it and she just started looking and walking, talking, joining community groups. And she noticed while doing these activities and doing her people watching, she liked to know who was in all the houses, what they were doing, who had what job. Some people would say, this is just nosy, nosy old lady. But if you got to know her, and I think I did a little bit, she definitely doesn't come across like that. The house had been derelict for not long at all and had immediately got her attention. In this area, it makes it look bad and it attracts unwarranted attention because the houses are rather big. And this links into our previous encounter of the castle, which obviously explains that abandoned buildings attract attention, whether it be houses or massive castles. It gets similar reactions once people know. Because what happens is these guys put these posts up on forums, they tell all their friends and fellow explorers, and before you know it, once one person finds out, you're getting 10 visits a day, especially if it had a history and it's of interest. And the same thing goes for squatters, homeless. If one friend puts something out or word gets out on the street or the local town centre or city centre, you'll end up having an army of people there in no time. So Shiela was very worried about this, and she understood this tactic which people use. And she immediately started voicing concerns with the other neighbours. They were asking questions, what's going on? There was no activity. So far it was in okay condition. The yard was overgrown. They had heard that the person had passed away, and they couldn't find who was next of kin or who was the, executor, I think that's what they call it, of the will. So the situation they had was like a buffer. It was a waiting time zone where they were trying to sort stuff out, but it was dragging out way too long. And when this happens, it turns into a tense period between things can happen in this property as it's left vacant for so long. And it's not good. It had people in the neighborhood worried, but Shiela was the most worried out of everyone. She started noticing some unusual behavior. Now, this would mostly happen at night. Now, Shiela does go to bed early, so she was seeing stuff at like 8 o'clock in the evening, which is totally uncommon because these explorers, squatters, they tend to keep a low profile until very late at night so they are not caught, because obviously it's illegal and the law enforcement will be notified and they will end up going to the house and getting the people out and maybe even arresting them. So, it was something they always did. A good tactic they use is to go under the cover of darkness, but nothing gets past Shiela, trust me. she's continually watching this house. She's continually inquiring, what's going on, who's there, when's things getting sorted. And after a while, a couple of weeks passed and she got no reply. They were just ignoring absolutely everything she had to say, and it got very frustrating for her, to the point where she accepted that there was nothing she could do short of going up there and just checking if there were people in there. And she wasn't going to do that. Although she wanted to, she obviously valued her safety very highly and didn't know what kind of person was living in there. There is a lot of kind of activity and uncertainty in Minneapolis and the surrounding area, and people are definitely on edge, I would say. So it's not safe, from her experience, in her opinion, it's not safe. This is where things take a very unusual turn in this particular encounter, because Shiela stopped probing. She stopped looking into it. She stopped contacting these people like the local government. She stopped contacting law enforcement. And when she was seeing these sightings, she effectively just gave up. And she said that there was nothing she could do because every time she would ring and they would ignore her. One evening, she remembered looking out of her window and seeing a group of 2 hooded figures heading into the property round the back. So clearly, they'd smashed the back window, and that was their route in and out. And they were using the property for whatever they were using it for. And while she was watching, she was extremely confused what was happening, because the cops would never turn up, and they're supposed to patrol abandoned properties at least every once in a while, and they never seemed to come by at all to even care about the house, which was really, really concerning for her. They seemed to be so overworked in other areas that they just couldn't come by. So whoever was staying in this house illegally effectively just was allowed to stay there for a long, long time, unhindered. And the only one that really cared or knew about it was Shiela, as all the other neighbors initially gave up once they heard the "we don't know" from the official bodies or something. So she's continually ticking away the weeks. She's getting frustrated. She's getting upset. There's no car in the drive. The yard at the front is totally overgrown. She makes a decision that she is going to ignore it and try and forget about it. And if it gets really bad, then she always has the option to sell up and just get out of the area. She had a dream of moving to places like Oregon or Texas. She likes being out in the country. But the problem with that is she really has no family that are close by. Obviously, all of her young ones have fled or flocked to the nest, and they've just got their own lives, so they can't, take care of her in the middle of a different state, hours and hours away. So she made the decision that she was going to leave, and she was about to get ready to leave when all of a sudden she tells her family, or what's left of it, that she's going to move and she's going to leave. When the following morning she wakes up and notices something really, really weird about the house. And this is really strange. I was almost close to not featuring this encounter because it doesn't really make any sense. But I thought I'd do it anyway because this lady spent a lot of time sharing this with me. And I think that it would be rude not to, because she also wants to hear what you guys have to say, the community. And remember, she has full health checks, physicals, they do the psychological testing, like the brain training stuff. And she is coming back fully clear. She's had lots of expensive health testing done. She does not have Alzheimer's or any kind of onset stuff like that. She wakes up, and it's been a couple of days since she announced to her family that she is moving because she can't take the disturbances, the music, the noise, and obviously the cops ignoring all of the calls because they just didn't want to deal with it. So she was a couple of days past telling her family that she's leaving. She's up and leaving. She's going to buy a country house. She's going to fulfill her dream, and she's going to make it happen. She doesn't deserve to put up with this. But that morning she wakes up. She looks out the window, as she always does. Remember, she doesn't give a damn for the TV or technology and all that social media. She looks out the window. Everything's normal. Everyone's yards, the same pots and flowers, the same hedges, the same cars, the same tags, vehicle tags. Everything's exactly as it would be every morning. Details that everyone doesn't really pay attention to because they don't change. But as she turns to look back at this house, She can't believe what she's looking at, because she said in that moment it felt like she had slept 100 weeks. She looks over to this house and she says to me, the overgrown yard looked perfect. It looked pristine compared to everyone else's. The house had been repainted. The roof had been redone. There were 2 family SUVs in the driveway. And yet that very night before, it was overgrown yard, no cars, still being traversed by squatters and homeless, and was not that colour, had not been painted that colour. So she was there thinking to herself, I need to get another physical. I need to give another psychological health test because I'm losing my damn mind. But there's nothing that really can explain what she experienced. And she went round to all the other neighbours. This is the creepiest part, but it makes sense when you think that today no one talks to each other. No one pays attention to the details, like I said. You know, something can happen and no one even knows it happened. They're so caught up in scrolling or watching stuff or drama online that they don't even look out the window anymore. And she went round to all the different neighbours and they all just acted really, really weird, as if they had seen this process of the hedges being cut, of the house being painted, the cars turning up, the new family moving in, and the squatters being evicted. That's not a process that happens in the span of 8 hours while Sheila's asleep. It was like she had woken up in a brand new dimension. She had gone through some kind of a portal, and some people experience similar things like this, where it's almost like the Mandela effect, but not quite the same. It's more severe, in my opinion, where you remember your neighbor had a red car, and then one morning you wake up, or it's like a gradual process. All of a sudden they don't have that car in red anymore. It's in silver. And the only fathomable explanation is that they got new paint. You know, they repainted their car, or they wrapped it in some kind of vinyl at like the car body shop. But why would they do that? So it's very bizarre, because she's looking at this house. She goes on Google Earth. She's not losing her mind. It was fully abandoned for very, very long. It was absolutely overgrown. Even when the neighbor was still alive, before he passed away for the past year or two, he stopped paying for landscapers. The place turned into a jungle. And here she was waking up. And the only possible way, well, I mean, to me it doesn't even seem possible, is that they had a team of professional landscapers, house painters, and a family pay and move into the property. Oh, and don't forget the cops evicting all the squatters, all within an 8-hour window. That doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't add up. And I've had a lot of submissions like this about portals, alternate dimensions, waking up and thinking, oh, I put this there, but it's moved. Or my neighbors used to have this in their front yard and now it's gone. So I said, where's it gone? And they go, what are you on about? I never had that. But you remember them having it. It's really bizarre. And, you know, it makes you question yourself. It makes you question your own memory, which is why I had to say at the beginning, she does not have any form of Alzheimer's or condition for memory loss, although she is obviously 70, in her 70s. So it is extremely bizarre and unexplainable because there's no end to it. She had to still leave because that was her intent. She had told her family, I'm leaving. But then the morning she wakes up and she just sees that. And she kept watching the house, even during her process of moving out, her process of selling up. And it was a family. They had one daughter, one son, played in the neighborhood. And it was just like they'd always been there. She didn't know who these people were. She introduced herself to them, and they acted totally normal. We've moved to the neighborhood. Nice to see you. And it just spooked her out even more. She said I couldn't talk to them. I refused to get involved. It felt like I wasn't talking to humans. It felt like I wasn't talking to something that was real. Like I had imagined all this, or I had been asleep or in a coma for months. If you guys have ever cleared out a property, you will know it takes ages ages and ages and ages to clear out a property. And it's a month-long process, depending on how big the property is. You got to clear out the inside. You got to do the yard. Now, obviously, that's all optional, depending on how much money you want to get when you sell it, if it's going to be to a good standard. But all the things that were done, they'll take months. Even if you have professionals in and you did it all within 2 or 3 weeks, that's what, 21 days versus 8 hours. I always tell people to be extremely prepared if you go out hiking. It's really important because you have to be prepared for the unexpected to happen. Now, I'm not telling you to go out dressed like some military officer on tour. The truth is that some basic equipment, telling someone where you're going, and a bottle of water and a couple of other things are really all you need. But today I'm going to be talking about something that is a basic horror encounter. This isn't a paranormal, it's not extraterrestrial, it's not anything related to alternate dimensions as we have covered today. This is an experience that is a real life emergency, and they're not ones where you get time to think and ponder. What could have happened there? What was that? Your life is blurring in front of you. I myself have been in a situation like this, and I may cover it in the future. But it is terrifying. If any of you have ever found someone having a medical emergency and you don't know what to do, you feel so helpless and you feel like, well, there's no point you being there. In fact, it gets to the point where you feel like you're just there to suffer and watch them helplessly. This encounter happened and it was experienced by a young lady. She was out training for a cross-country competition. She is 19. She would go out on the trails near where she lived a lot, like every day. She trained extremely hard. And at one point, she had an experience where she came across a lady who was coming down one of the trails that she was running up. This particular area where this subscriber runs is very, very big. It's kind of like Colorado. It's very dry, very barren, not much vegetation in certain areas. And she was using these trails to get fit enough and, in shape for I think they call it a state nationals for cross country in America. And she was doing lots of different training and she knew this route very, very well, like the back of her hand. She was doing 5 miles very slowly in the morning, and then she would work her way up and start doing some other type of training in the evening. This was a morning run, and it was the morning of a Wednesday in November. And she never expected what she saw. She came across a lady who looked like she had been hiking, had, a bunch of stuff on her like a backpack, and she was just calling out, basically. My subscriber, who we're going to call Aryana, was running towards the lady. And as she ran towards this lady on the trail, it's a very narrow trail, she was calling her. And she was like saying, excuse me, putting her hand out awkwardly, trying to get Aryana's attention. And Aryana stops her watch. She stops her GPS watch that's tracking her like miles that she's run. And she's like, yes, like, what's wrong? She's never been stopped on a run. I asked her. Never had anything like this happen in her life. So it's extremely bizarre. And she's thinking, something bad's happened. No one's going to stop you in the Colorado desert or a trail to sell you something. It's only ever going to be bad or asking for help, or at the very best, asking for directions because they might be lost. And obviously, Aryana would have been the perfect person to ask in this case, as she has run miles and miles around the whole area where they were. But this lady did not ask for directions. She was rather old, around her late 60s, which I class as old for hiking in the middle of nowhere. Not old in terms of actual life, but she is really, really shaken up. She is shaking. Aryana says she was holding her hands, she was gripping her wrists and rubbing her hands together, which is a key sign of anxiety, a key sign of fretting and stress. And immediately this lady explains that her friend has collapsed on the trail. Now, this was a long way away. In fact, it was over a mile away. Aryana started her watch again and ran. So this poor lady had walked I mean, covering a mile hiking, depends how fast you're going, you can probably cover it in about 20 minutes on average. If you walk very fast, maybe closer to 15. Slow jogging will take you 10 minutes. Very fast running, 5 minutes. And the world record, I think, is around 3 minutes and something. It's under 4 minutes by a long way. So Aryana ran out. It took her around 6 minutes. She ran pretty fast to get to this lady. And it was simple instructions from this shaken up lady. She said, stay on this path. That's where she is. You'll see her. You will see her so easy. So Aryana runs for 1 mile. She follows the trail. And sure enough, she turns up to find this lady collapsed on the trail up ahead. Now, Aryana does not know any type of first aid. She doesn't know how to help someone in this situation. And just like a lot of us, she came across a lady unresponsive and had no idea where to really start. So she was panicking. She was scared. She didn't know how to get the attention of this lady, whether she was still alive. Obviously, a lot of us know the basics, to check for a pulse, to check for breath. So Aryana began doing this. She was out of breath herself from running very fast. And now she was given the task of possibly trying to save a life, which for someone who's 19 and got their whole life ahead of them and haven't experienced big things like this is traumatizing. It's life-changing mentally. But she did the right thing. She tried everything she could. And this lady's, person she was hiking with, her friend, was not anywhere to be seen because she was going to have to hike another mile all the way back. So she was going to take 18 minutes, maybe 15 if she's very fast at walking. But Aryana was all alone at this point, and she did not have a phone. She had no idea what to do. So the first thing she does before checking this lady for any vitals is see if the lady has a phone. She wants to make a call before checking vitals, and I thought that was a good idea. Maybe people disagree, but making that call to 911, if there is signal out there, was probably the best thing to do to start with. She didn't have a phone on her. That's another hurdle. She puts this lady into a position where it's easier to tell if she has any sign of life. She finds a faint pulse and a very faint breath. And at this point, she was in such a rush, her adrenaline is pumping, she doesn't remember anything the lady said, whether it's low blood sugar, whether it's seizures, whether it's a health condition, a disease, a heart attack, a stroke. No one knew. And that's the scary part, because she didn't know what to do. She wasn't going to start CPR because the lady's alive. The lady is breathing, shallow, but breathing. And the only thing Aryana thought to do in this situation was to run back to the lady and ask questions, because she couldn't do anything else. There was no way to contact anyone and to explain the area and the terrain. We're in dry desert land, or kind of like desert land, like sandy clay. And we are 3 miles from the nearest road. So even if Aryana runs it as fast as she can, it's going to take her way over 17 minutes to get to this place. And she was a bit shocked that these two, well over middle-aged ladies were out so far away from anything, without dogs, without, one had no cell phone. But thank God she ran around half a mile back to the lady who was on her way to her friend, and she has a phone on her. This was the moment that they kind of got saved a bit, because they did have signal in this park, and it was fantastic. It literally saved them so much stress and so much adrenaline. Aryana uses the phone, they call 911, and they explain the situation as best they can. It doesn't appear that this lady has any underlying conditions, any type of, seizures or fits that would cause her to have this happen. So they were both totally unsure, but at least she got the phone. While she's on the call with the dispatch, she runs fast, like another, I would say just over 1/4 of a mile, because don't forget, they were still walking together while she was asking for the lady's phone, and they were walking pretty briskly. She gets back to this lady on the floor. At this point, the lady is completely moved out of the position that Aryana put her in, which was the recovery position. And she was now moving onto her front as if she was in severe discomfort. She was unresponsive, and there was no speech, but there was a faint, shallow breath and a faint pulse. So Aryana is told some simple things to do to test for stuff while at the scene. The dispatch are heroes as well, just like the first responders. Did a great job of asking her to do things to check the lady, and they narrowed it down to a possible stroke or heart attack. They now needed assistance to make it to them, which was going to take a while. They were in the worst place possible, arguably, other than being even deeper into the park, in which case, yeah, the chances of survival at that point would have been very, very low for this lady if she had had some kind of stroke and it required serious medical attention. The things start to progress. The dispatch update Aryana and the lady, and they say there are units on the way, there's law enforcement, and there are medics, and they are making their way down towards the gate, which leads out onto the trail, which they were both hiking, or Aryana was running and the lady was hiking. They wait a long time. There's like half an hour that passes. This poor lady is still in the same state. She doesn't get worse. She doesn't stop breathing. She doesn't, her heart rate continues very faintly. And things are just pure stress for Aryana. If she didn't have that phone, I don't know what they would have done. And that ties into my advice at the beginning, guys. Go prepared. People don't like taking their phones everywhere because, for whatever reason. But the truth is that it might save yours or someone else's life. And even these people like me that don't really like the tech or taking the phones everywhere we go, sometimes you kind of need that. So you can buy these small little flip phones for nothing and keep it in your pocket. And if there's anywhere with signal and you're in an emergency, you have a way higher chance of survival. That's what I recommend, and that's what I've started doing. So I would say to you guys that in this situation that Aryana was in, if they hadn't had the phone, then they would have had to find someone else on the trail, and it was not a very well hiked trail. It was a long way out, or she would have had to run all the way back to the road, which would have taken her 17 minutes, and that would have been her PR pace. So, a 5K, 3.1 miles, 17 minutes. So that phone saved them. It allowed them to not only be pinpointed with the coordinates for law enforcement to attend, but also for the dispatch to tell Aryana and the lady what to do, what checks to perform, what positions to put the lady in, how to treat her if they could with whatever they had there. And it turned into a situation where they went on to actually save this lady's life. And when medics arrived, which took ages, we're talking like 45, 50 minutes to turn up, they managed to get right by this lady. They gave her a bunch of things. Once they had administered their different things, they managed to take her away, and they used a helicopter to get her off of that park in Colorado. They airlifted her to the nearest hospital, and the friend went in the helicopter with the lady, wrote down her number for Aryana. Aryana bailed on her training run. She was so stressed, her adrenal glands were probably empty, and she went all the way back home and kept that number and texted every day for updates. The lady had an operation, she had a stint put in, she had a surgery for something else, and she got photo updates. And this isn't your typical scary, experience that I usually cover on this channel, but I thought it was really heroic. I thought it was, heroic, yeah. I thought it was good. I thought it was cool. And this lady, Aryana saved somebody. And if she hadn't have been there to run back and forth using that phone, then what would have happened? And here's the thing. Lots of you are going to comment this. I asked this to Aryana. I did point this out. Why didn't the lady call 911 when her friend first collapsed? She said that these two ladies were dazed. They weren't in, obviously one had no consciousness even when the medics arrived, but her responsiveness became better and her pulse, became clearer and faster and her breathing became better. But the other lady was just it was like the stress had clouded her judgment or perception of what to do next. She went hiking for help instead of using the phone in her pocket. It was either that or she had no signal when she first tried, so she thought walking for help was the best thing to do. But a lot of people would probably say leaving the side of a friend or a loved one was the last thing they would do in this situation. But if you don't prepare, then sometimes you might not have a choice, because how else are you going to get help? I think it's a valid point. Thank you for watching today's video. If you are new here, please click the subscribe button down below. I hope you're all well and healthy, and I will see you guys in the next upload, which should be tomorrow. Thank you.